We discussed the data architecture in Azure, right? We talked about different data model, and inside this data model, we have a relational database. We also have a hierarchy, star schema applicable to data warehouse. Star schema, data warehouse, this concept we will discuss in later session. For today's session, we are going to talk about a relational database. So the next topic we are going to go through is the Azure Relational Database. As important as a relational database is, Azure definitely supports a wide variety of relational databases. Offers a SQL Server and a bunch of open source PostgreSQL, MySQL, MariaSQL, and it also supports, as a preview right now, supports certain Oracle instance on Azure. So you can also provision a virtual machine and run your own setup. Set up your own database. That can be any database, but in that sense, it's more like a virtual machine instead of a managed database. The flagship database product of Microsoft, no doubt, is a SQL Server. And Azure provides three types of a SQL Server-based relational database. The first one is the Azure SQL database. The second one is the Azure SQL managed instance, and third is SQL Server on Azure virtual machine. That apparently the last one, from the name suggests, you can see it's a SQL Server built. Pretty much you provision a virtual machine and install SQL Server on that. And by doing this, you can receive some support, some license discount from Microsoft. This apparently is the most flexible option. The virtual machine is yours. You have access to the virtual machine. You can do whatever configuration, installation, and the update you want to do, right? The downside is that you are basically still running a virtual machine. You are still be DBA. You run operation and maintenance on your own. The other two options, SQL database and the SQL management instance. From the name, you can see the Azure SQL database is a serverless option where although you still have the idea of a server, you don't really tie you don't really tie this database to certain server or certain hardware. So it's more advanced, more automated, and more scalable, more expandable. And it's the management. More of the management is done by Azure. However, the problem is that because of this abstraction, it's further away from hardware and it cannot do a lot of low level tasks. When I say low level, I'm talking in the computer science sense, meaning it's further away from hardware and certain operations you can no longer is out of your reach. Because of that, this is not compatible, 100% compatible with the SQL Server. Where on the other hand, you have a managed instance, as the name suggests, you get the instance of SQL. And it's managed though, comparing to the third option of a virtual machine. A lot of operations are handled by Azure. So it requires some menu configuration and management, but not all, and it's highly compatible with the SQL Server. Um, so which one do you want to choose? I think if you have utilized certain SQL Server specific feature, you probably want to use a managed instance. If you are just using the general relational database functionality, you just basically running SQL can get you to anywhere. And you desire a more flexible, more expandable approach or less maintenance, you probably want to choose SQL database. Microsoft provides a detailed list of features and functionalities of these options that you can choose from their documentation site. Now let's talk about the open source side of the relational database. Microsoft also offers an array of open source databases like PostgreSQL, MySQL, MariaDB. So here I'm using PostgreSQL as an example. Inside a PostgreSQL setup, you usually have a virtual machine, but which runs the PostgreSQL. But this virtual machine is hidden away from you. You don't see the virtual machine. You only see the um, user interface, the REST API it provides. Then the PostgreSQL also uh, stores data in some managed disk, and this disk is also hidden away from you. And the backups of this server will be stored in zone redundant storage. Data is stored redundantly in Azure storage, and there's a virtual machine running PostgreSQL. So the advantage of this is that it's fully managed. The backup, the patch, the monitoring, and logging are all handled by Azure. And by default, you have the redundancy and the high availability for you. You also can just do pay as you go. Once you finish utilizing that, you close that, you don't pay for it. You don't need to worry about the virtual machines you provision or the storage you provision. And of course, you have a better security than most others. With that, let's take a look at the different options of Microsoft Azure. Let's go to, if I choose the Hamburg menu and go to All Services, and this is all services, and if I go to the database side, this is what you will see. This first session is the SQL Server options, right? You have a SQL databases, and the SQL databases and the SQL servers, these are two related products, and also Elastic pools. These are related together. That's the first option. We talked about the SQL databases. Then there's the SQL managed instances, and there's SQL virtual machines, or SQL Server on virtual machine. So these are the options for Azure SQL. And then there's open source database engines such as MariaDB, MySQL, and PostgreSQL. Let's choose Postgres flexible server. If I'm going to create one, so I'm going to again choose the subscription and the resource group. And I will just enter the different server name, maybe DS684 test, then utilizing a PostgreSQL version, utilizing development. And here I'm going to choose the CPU and the memory. Remember, I use a flexible server, so there's still this concept of server. That's a virtual machine that I will be running my Postgres job. And down there, we have the availability zone. I can choose multiple zones, one zone or two zone or three zone. That's how much I want to distribute my data, so that I can get some redundancy and get availability, right? Do we want to do high availability? Do we want to redundant to the standby replica? Then you can utilize either Entra authentication or PostgreSQL authentication. And then if we choose PostgreSQL authentication, I'll just choose maybe Postgres and the password. I'm going to randomly type some. And oh, I cannot put. Apparently, I was typing in some. So on top of that, you see the cost estimate, and I can do networking. You can have a public access, and you can also have a private access. If you choose private access, you will place yours into a certain virtual network that we created before, right? Now here we choose the public access so that everybody can access, but you can also define basically it's a firewall rule defining which IP address can access your server. And then there's a security, there's data encryption, all these choices and tags as we talked about before. And then you can review and create. So this is how you would create a PostgreSQL. And you can see here, what they are doing is you are basically defining a virtual machine. What's the size of a virtual machine? Where you want to store it? and some database specific option like its version, its authentication, all these things. Then finally, but the storage you don't need to define because it's expandable. So that's how you define a PostgreSQL server here.